This is Open to Hope Radio, featuring Dr. Gloria Horsley and her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley, coming to you on behalf of the Open to Hope Foundation, dedicated to those who are looking for hope after loss. Now, here's Dr. Gloria.
Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my co-host, Dr. Heidi Horsley. Good morning, Heidi from California.
Good morning, Mom. I'm here in New York. It's 1 o'clock.
Well, Heidi, introduce our guest today. We've got a great guest, and what I love about this guest today is my feelings of loss right now. And she inspires me at this very moment to know that no matter what happens, that you can go on. So talk a little bit about Terry. And by the way, she's one of the authors for Open to Hope. So we hope you'll go on there and read some of her material.
Absolutely, Mom. I am so excited to have Terry on. And like you said, it's really a great time for me to have her on because we have our own multiple losses that we have not only survived through but thrived through. And Terry is someone that knows loss so incredibly deeply at its core. And she really is an example of how resilient the human spirit is. Terry Jones-Brady is a strong and deeply spiritual person, and both of her daughters were born with cystic fibrosis. Terry began an unfathomable journey and survived not 2 but 3 deaths. After the deaths of her daughters, her husband died by suicide. She grieved, searched for understanding, and finally found love and happiness again. And Terry is the author of Mosaic Heart, Reshaping the Shards of a Shattered Life, and she is also one of our Open to Hope authors. Welcome to the show, Terry.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you very much.
Talk a little bit about your losses with Heather and Holly. They both had cystic fibrosis, and Heather died younger than Holly, right?
My first daughter, Heather, was diagnosed with this disease when she was just 8 months old, and then she lived 12 years, which was the expected lifespan at that time. She died in 1982. Now, fortunately, with new treatments and so on, anticipated lifespan of an individual with cystic fibrosis is much longer. Anyway, she died at 12. She died undergoing a procedure called a bronchial lavage, which is under general anesthesia. The surgeon attempts to clean out her lungs. Cystic fibrosis, as you probably know, is a disease that affects the respiratory system and also the digestive system, and so gradually the lungs just are destroyed. But in the meantime, these girls that I had and most of the cystic fibrosis patients that I've been acquainted with try to live lives that are as normal as possible in between hospitalizations and in between physical therapy treatments at home.
Were you able to do the book because you journaled? Is that, I mean, because it's so complete and so full and so rich and interesting. Was that because of your journaling?
Well, I started writing. That's how my writing began, was as journaling. I began journaling when I was pregnant with my second daughter, actually, not really realizing at the time that journaling was a technique that was widely used in the psychiatric therapeutic community to deal with stress and with loss and with grief and so on. But my journaling kind of evolved into first poetry, and I wrote poetry, and then I began writing more and more, and I began attending writers groups, but I really didn't begin writing seriously until actually after all my losses. I just began writing thoughts, and particularly early in the morning, when you wake up in the morning and you're sort of in that liminal halfway place between being asleep and awake, that's a really good time to sit down and get your thoughts on paper. And the beautiful thing about journaling is that you don't have to worry about all the things that English teachers worry about. You can just write it down. You can write how angry you are. You can just write whatever. You can be creative. So I began to do that, and then it became habitual with me. And for 26 years, actually, I lived with my children. It was 26 years from the time my oldest daughter was diagnosed through her death to the death of my younger daughter. That was 26 years.
So Terry, I know that Heather died at 12, and how old was Holly when Heather died?
She was 7.
She was
they were
7.
4.5 years.
She was your only surviving child at that point?
Right. They were 4.5 years apart. So she was 7, and her sister was 12.
And Holly was
22 when she died.
22,
so
okay.
I'm so grateful that I had her for the length of time I did. She actually had a pretty good life, I think, for a child with a chronic illness. Heather, the older one, was always quite frail and was homebound a lot, although she did attend school because she liked to attend school. And my husband and I decided very early on in the girls' lives that we would not treat them as hothouse flowers, that we would encourage them to get out and live and do as much as they felt they were capable of doing, within reason. So we let them do things and we let them live because,
right.
Well, I felt and I still do feel that life is meant to be lived full out, as full as
I love
possible.
that.
Thank you.
Life is meant to be lived full out. Heidi, I interrupted you. Did you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to know if this is so interesting to me. I just wanted to know if Terry started journaling right after Heather died and if that was one of the things that helped her to transform her life.
I remember beginning the journaling seriously when I was expecting Holly, when I was pregnant with Holly, which was, she was born in May of 1974, so it was around that time. But immediately after Heather died, I was talking earlier about how there's this time between asleep and awake where I think things bubble up from the subconscious. And anyway, I was lying there in bed, and Heather had been dead weeks, maybe a couple months. It hadn't been long. And there was an Emily Dickinson poem that I just loved. The Emily Dickinson poem begins, "After great pain, a formal feeling comes." I don't remember it all now, but anyway, it goes on to say, "This is the hour of lead, remembered if outlived, as freezing persons recollect the snow." Well, thinking about that poem, lying there in my bed, Hour of Lead, made me think of a book which Anne-Marie Lindbergh had published, and it was a book of her journals and letters. And the title of the book was Hour of Lead, Hour of Gold. Or maybe it was Hour of Gold, Hour of Lead, the other way around. And I was lying there, I was just thinking, I've got to get that book. So this was back in the early 80s. I just cannot wait for the library to open. And as soon as I could, I went to the library, checked out that book, Hour of Gold, Hour of Lead, and it was Anne-Marie Lindbergh's journaling and letter writing. First, the Hour of Gold section was about the early years of her marriage to Charles Lindbergh and, how handsome he was in his aviator suit and how happy they were sitting on the balcony eating blueberry muffins for breakfast, blah, blah. And then the Hour of Lead part was after their baby had been kidnapped and all the horrible feelings that she went through. And I was so astonished at this time, because remember, at this time I had not done any grief work, really, to speak of, but she talked about the kinds of feelings, both physical and emotional, that I was having. For example, the feeling that you are aware that you literally feel a pain in your heart. And I have talked to other people who have experienced this as well. And then this huge fear that everyone else is going to be taken away from you also. And
in your case, the fear was legitimate, because here you were grieving the death of Heather and knowing that Holly also had the same disease of cystic fibrosis.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. The other thing that she talked to that was so important to me, because it was what I was feeling but had never talked to another person who shared it, was this feeling that after a loss like this, you are somehow different from the rest of the world. I mean,
right.
To lose a child is something that is almost inconceivable to a parent, or probably to a non-parent, to anybody who hasn't experienced it. A person who hasn't been through this will just stand on the outside looking in at your life and thinking, how in the world can you endure that? And I know we ask ourselves the same question, and it's like suddenly you're living on another planet.
So, yeah, exactly. I agree. And then you went on to lose Holly, and then you went on to your husband. I was kills himself, dies by suicide. And, One of the things I was thinking about is how you're both artistic people, and your husband, I was kind of laughing, was when you were talking about how they had a memorial service for him at the park, and everybody turned out in the whole region and all that because he was in community theater. And you talked about him wearing a beret at one time and that kind of thing. And I thought, this man was too sensitive to live in this world with everything that happened. I know he became an alcoholic, and there was a long decline and a road. So we got to move on with this because people are going to want to know, how did you deal with Heather, Holly, and then your beloved husband dying? And one of I just picked out some quotes from your book that I like very much, and one of them is, "One thing is for sure, if you live on the planet long enough, your heart will be broken." That is so true, but yours was broken really early. How did you do it?
Well, that's a good question. I thought about this, and I thought about how can I delineate specific strategies. When I was writing my book, I thought maybe I needed to do this. Maybe I needed to outline strategies for living through grief. Well, let me tell you, that's not easy to pinpoint because it's not a cut and dry process, and it's not linear. I mean, we spiral up and down and in and out of the grieving. There are levels of grieving, and I think there are levels of our understanding of death. I remember in a hospital waiting room, and this was when my daughter Holly, my second daughter, was during her last days, and this was in 1996. She was 22, and she had a bilateral lung transplant. She'd been listed, on the organ transplant list, and organs became available for her. And I don't want to cry, I won't. But at any rate, so she had the bilateral lung transplant, and we were elated because this is what we had waited for. This is what we thought would give her a new life. And she would get her new lungs, and get on with her life. So,
you tell a lot about that in the book with great description. It's great, and then she doesn't make it, right? And she dies then. Yeah.
The surgeons came out. They came out early in the morning after an all-night surgery and said, "Oh, she's doing well. You can see her in a few minutes." Well, a few hours went by, and they came out and they said, "She's taken a turn for the worse, and we don't know why, but she's rejecting the lungs." And so they put her into a medically induced coma. To give her the lungs a chance to rest and to prevent agitation on her part. And she was in a coma for 12 days, and then they unplugged her from the life support equipment because, well, that's another story. But anyway, during those 12 days, it was just, it's a time that I describe in my book, a very dark time. And one day we were sitting in the hospital waiting room, very aptly named because nothing happens but waiting for news of one kind or another. And out of nowhere, I don't know where it came from, but I suddenly I don't know if it was a moan or a scream, but I screamed out, "Please don't take my daughter away from me. I will go insane." And here I was in this room full of strangers and also family members and friends. And it just came out of me, out of nowhere. And my husband rushed to comfort me, and his sister rushed to comfort me, and other people just stared and probably felt, embarrassed and helpless. But that's an example of the immediacy of grief.
Right,
it's like
it sounded like that was kind of a release for you too. That's where it came from, and I think you're right. That's why it's so hard to describe to people how you do go through the process of grieving and recovery, of releasing. When do you release and how? But talk about your little analogy at the end, which I liked, about being deep-rooted like trees, because I think that's really, really important there.
Let's see. Would you like me to just read a little section then from the book about...
or you can just talk about it, whichever.
Yeah, I think that's in the early part of the book.
Actually, it's at the very end where I think you talk about, why don't you just explain the analogy where you felt that the trees had deep roots?
Yeah, okay. Well, I said at some point in my life, and here I am reading, but I'll be quick, I learned not to make into catastrophes events that comprise living the life one is given. Each respond like the deeply rooted old-growth trees that surround my home. During hurricanes, blizzards, and ice storms, I've watched the trees, oaks, beeches, maples, dogwoods, sweet gums, yellow poplars, hollies, pines, and cedars bend and bow but rarely break. Almost always after storms, they respond to the call of the sun's rays and the nurturance of spring rains, growing taller and stronger every year. I stand as proof that the human spirit is capable of responding to suffering with just such resilience. I think that's what you're referring to.
Absolutely, yeah. The resilience piece, I think that's really important. And then just to tell people to go on, you meet a person and you fall in love and you get married, and it's the end of the book of the things you do together, but you always take the girls with you and your husband. And I love the fact that the man you're married now calls them his girls too, which is very sweet. Terry, thank you so much for being on the show today, and thank you for all your courage and all your sharing. And I would say to people, get the book, because there are just tons of wonderful little insights in this book. It is a compelling story. So thanks a lot for being on.
You've been listening to Open to Hope Radio, hosted by Doctors Gloria and Heidi Horsley. Like today's edition, all of our past programs are available on demand at opentohope.com, along with helpful articles, videos, resources, and links to help get you through the toughest time of your life. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and sign up for our monthly newsletter. Again, that's opentohope.com. Check it out today. Then be sure to stop by next Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, when we'll be posting another edition of Open to Hope Radio. Remember, others have been where you are. They made it through, and you can too, as long as you're open to hope.